it's Stephanie here with a video for my favorite things. In this week's episode of MFTv, we are going to be creating with the newest card kit called Beautiful Butterflies. This card kit is so much fun. I love these butterfly images, and they have some really great layering stamps. So you can see there's a solid image, there is kind of like an additional image that kind of gives a watercolor look, and then there's also an outline image. And for the card I'm going to create today, I decided to just use the outline image. I'm not going to use any of the layering stamps. I just want to use that very top image of the butterfly at the bottom of the sheet there. And I'm going to do some embossing so that we can do a little bit of a watercolor technique in a minute here when we get these embossed. So to start off, I am taking a embossing bag here and wiping it all over my cardstock. And what that's doing is it's putting a powder onto the cardstock surface. And that's going to help so that I don't have embossing powder sticking where I don't want it to stick. We are going to be embossing with the black embossing powder that comes in the kit. So I definitely recommend treating the area first just to prevent that embossing powder from sticking in areas that you don't want it. So what I'm doing is I'm adding some Versamark ink to the butterfly. This is the 2x2 ink cube that comes in the card kit. And I'm just completely coating that butterfly stamp, and then I'm stamping these butterflies onto my cardstock panel. And the cardstock that I am using is the Ranger watercolor cardstock. And I'm using this because, like I mentioned earlier, I am going to be doing some watercoloring onto this, so I need it to be able to hold up to the water that we're going to add. There is two sides to watercolor paper. Normally, one side is pretty textured and one side is kind of smoother. So I am using the smoother side so that I get a really nice detailed stamped image with the butterfly stamps. So now that I've done all my stamping, I'm going to go ahead and add the embossing powder. So this is black embossing powder that comes in this month's kit, and I'm just adding it over my panel using a coffee filter. And you can see there that I accidentally stamped the two bottom butterflies. I ran into the other one, and I didn't intentionally do that, but once I kind of looked at it, I decided that I didn't mind it. I liked the look, and because I was doing all of this area with black embossing powder, I thought it would look fine that they kind of blended together. So I left it as is, and I'm just going to keep going. So I'm adding the embossing powder completely over all three of those butterflies. And just a quick tip, if you find that even though you've treated your cardstock, you still get a little bit of stray embossing powder kind of going where you don't want it, just take a dry paintbrush and kind of paint off that excess powder. Just very carefully kind of go around your images and kind of brush it on, and it will take any of that extra loose powder right off of your cardstock, no problem. So I used my heat gun and heat set the butterfly images. So now they're all black, raised, shiny butterflies. They're all heat embossed. And now comes the fun part where we're going to do a fun little watercolor technique. So for my card here, I'm going to use Tombow dual brush markers, and that's because they're water-based, so they work really well with water. So feel free, though, to use anything that would work for this technique. You could use distress markers, you could use inks, you can use, an assortment of different mediums to create the same effect. So grab whatever you have on hand and just have fun with it. So I have a sheet of plastic here. This is just packaging from a stamp set, and I'm taking my markers and I'm coloring over top of it. And I only have it over the butterfly area just because so I can make sure that I have my marker kind of wide enough that it's going to cover the area where the butterflies are. So this is just reference to make sure I'm putting enough of the color onto the plastic sheet. And then I'm going to remove my cardstock panel, get it out of the way, because now we're going to add some water to this. So I just very easily scribbled the color on. I kind of layered it from blue, pink to purple. And now I'm going to take a water spritzer and I'm going to kind of spritz it into my hand first, and then I'm going to kind of drop it over top of all of this color. And I'm just trying to kind of control it a little bit more. I don't want the hard splatter of the water coming from the bottle directly onto the plastic piece. So this is just kind of allowing me to sprinkle it on versus kind of spraying it directly on there. And then once I have it on there, you just want to make sure you have enough water that is going to help that ink move, but you don't want to have so much that you end up with a big puddly mess. So I'm going to quickly flip this over, and I'm going to lay it right on top of my butterfly area. And because these are embossed, that embossing area is going to resist this color that we're adding, and it's just going to let the color kind of soak in around the butterflies. So I'm just using my fingertips and I'm pressing down and kind of moving that ink around. Because the water's there, it's just going to kind of splish around under there, and you can see when I lift it, I get a big splotch with that purple ink. And I didn't quite get enough blue how I wanted it. I have a lot of white space under the butterfly still. So I'm going to cheat a little bit and add a little bit more blue with the marker, just so I can add a little bit more blue detail under that butterfly. But generally, I just like to take my first attempt, do this technique, and kind of leave it with whatever I end up with. That's kind of the fun of this technique, is it's very random and you kind of get a different pattern every single time. So your card is always going to be unique because you're never going to get the same pattern twice, and I love that. So I'm adding a little bit more of the blue ink there. You can see I'm just kind of tapping it on, and I love how this turned out. I like the little bit of white detail I have in some of the butterflies. I love how the different colors mix together. I just love the pattern. I just think it's beautiful. So I completely let that air dry. I didn't use any heat guns on that. I just wanted it to completely dry by air. And now that it is dry, we can go ahead and start to assemble our card with this really fun, colorful piece. So I ended up trimming down the butterfly panel because I want to add it to a gray card base, and I decided I wanted to put a black mat underneath of it as well. So you can kind of see how it makes the color and the butterflies pop, but if you take it away, it just gives you a softer look. So either or would be really great, but for my card today, I really wanted those butterflies and that color to really pop, and I think the black mat really helps to do that. So I'm going to adhere all these pieces together, and then I'm going to put them onto my card front. So for the sentiment, I used the You Give Me Butterfly stamp set, which also comes in the kit, and I wanted to use the thank you stamp and do a sentiment banner on the front of the card. So I stamped the sentiment, you can see it up there at the top of the screen. I stamped it onto some white watercolor paper. I wanted to use the exact same paper that I did my stamping on so everything would match. And my plan was to kind of put this from one of the edges into the middle of the card. But when I started to play around with it and kind of position it in different spots, I felt like it was covering up too much of the color, or it was covering up too much of the butterfly. It didn't matter kind of where I put it, it was covering up too much of the front no matter where I had it. So I decided not to put a sentiment on the front of the card at all. I really love the artistic kind of watercolor creation that we made here, and I didn't want to cover any of that up. So I'm just going to stamp the thank you sentiment on the inside of the card instead. So don't be afraid if you feel like your scene on the front of your card just doesn't work with a sentiment. You can definitely leave it as is and just put a sentiment on the inside of the card. So I'm using my mini MISTI to do the stamping just in case I mess it up. I already have this beautiful card created and I didn't want to wreck it by doing some bad stamping on the inside. So I just laid it into my MISTI and let the top part hang out, and I'm just using some black licorice dye ink and I'm stamping that thank you right in the center. And I did have a few little white splotchy areas and I decided to restamp it, so I'm going to stamp it one more time. And then once I do that, I've completed the card and I'm much happier with the sentiment on the inside than I would have been with it on the outside. And now I have this really pretty card that I've created with a super easy technique that is just kind of fun. You get to play with ink and kind of splish it all over. And I ended up with this beautiful watercolor effect with these beautiful embossed butterflies. Thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed this technique and will give it a try. And I would love to give away a $50 gift voucher to the MFT online store. So please leave a comment on this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And we will announce the winner in next week's video. Just check the description box of next week's video to see if you've won. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.